Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to sincerely thank you all for making the time to participate in this seminar. My name is Dr. John Kalage. I'm the Executive Director for Hakelim, and I'm also one of the co-founder of the Coalition for Good Schools. I know how busy we are, and sometimes taking time out of your busy schedule to participate in seminars like this becomes a challenge. But I believe because of your commitment in preventing violence against children, especially in school, you have been able to find time despite of many competing priorities. So thank you very much for joining us. This is the third seminar, and I know, of course, some of you participated in the first and second webinar, but for the benefit of those who were not part of the first and second, then I'm going to briefly give you a background about Coalition for Good Schools and also some information about the genesis of it, so that at least you could be up to speed as we start our third seminar. Coalition for Good Schools was founded by about 13 members who are working on preventing violence against children in the Global South. And this was in 2019, we met for the first time, and the meeting was basically emanated from a kind of scanning that was done by our colleagues in Raising Voice, which showed that there's a lot that is happening in the Global South, but very little is documented, and especially in the peer-reviewed journal. So we met and try to discuss and try to understand why this is the case. And in that meeting that took place towards the end of 2019, we made a decision to do three things. One, we decided that we need to map out what was happening on the issues of violence against children in the Global South. We wanted to properly document and understand what is happening in the Global South on the prevention of violence against children in school. But secondly, we wanted also to identify who was leading on it. And thirdly, we agreed that we need to establish what was working. And the overall aim of all this was actually to develop a platform for sharing and also create a community of practice and look towards establishing an infrastructure necessary for this work to emerge more fully between peers and on the global stage. So out of that meeting, then we decided to establish 3 hubs in Asia, in Africa, and also in Latin America. Our colleagues who are also co-founder members did the study, the first study, and which was led by Shanaz from Children Institute at the University of Cape Town, and also Pranita from ICRW. So this study actually came out with very interesting findings, and we had the opportunity in the first webinar to hear what was the outcome of the study. And we have decided that in this particular session, we will give the opportunity for Shanaz and her colleague take at least 2 minutes to give us what transpired, what were the key findings from the study. And again, also in the second seminar, a part of the promising practice that are in the Global South, we had the opportunity to give our colleagues who are practitioners and whose program have showed very positive and impressive results. So they shared this during the second one, which we'll discuss now. How are we taking forward all what we have? The study that we have, the findings, and the experience that we had, but we need to see how do we move together forward. So Before I invite Deepak, who is going to be the main facilitator of this session, then I would like to give the opportunity to Shanaz to tell us briefly about what transpired in the study, which actually is found on the coalition website. Shanaz, are you there to take us through quickly? You have 2 minutes. You could actually summarize what really came out of the study.
Okay, thank you, John. You're giving me a really hard task to summarize in 2 minutes. But just to say that webinar 1 was truly an exciting webinar. Is my sound okay? And it was and Pranita Achut from ICRW, who joined me in that seminar, unfortunately can't be with us today, but we were in conversation with Deepak and John and spoke about the evidence review that we conducted on behalf of the Coalition for Good Schools. And really importantly was, firstly, we tried to unpack how we went about it so that we understood, so everyone understood the methods that we use. But most importantly, I think what took us by surprise was the immense amount of work that have been conducted in this area. So we started off with quite a large number of titles that we needed to sift through in order to get to 151 publications, both grey literature and those in peer-reviewed publications that we then reviewed. Out of that, there were 93 distinct programs that we then delved into to get an understanding of what are the key components of programs that are being implemented in the Global South, for us to understand what are some of the key lessons that we can draw out of the evidence review. And what we highlighted in the session, the first webinar, was really that there were 6 key lessons that we have taken out of the evidence review. And these key lessons are really around the characteristics of successful programs. The first being that violence in childhood and violence generally is incredibly complex, and therefore the programs that have been successful are the ones that's multi-component, that single approaches are not very successful in having sustained effects on violence prevention. Secondly, when you think about multi-component interventions, it's about engaging multiple stakeholders. And it's from the beginning, from the conceptualization of the intervention to its implementation. And it would be, and if you're thinking about multiple stakeholders, it's not just children, but it's their parents, it's community members, it's your school leadership, it's your teachers in schools. And those are the interventions that have the best success rates that we've seen. We also see that investing in structural change in schools have the best chance of leading to successful interventions. And therefore, what we do see, the few whole school interventions or programs like the Good Schools Toolkit and others have shown success in long-term, sustaining long-term effects. Importantly, Pranita spoke about group-based learning and how, particularly working around gender norms, that group learning are incredibly successful in and able to be delivered through training teachers in how to do this very successfully to address gender norms and to shift gender roles amongst adolescents in particular. And coming to the idea of how to include teachers is that it is really important that teachers and school staff be brought on board in interventions, because it's only through including teachers that you can truly be integrating a program into the school environment, and that has the greatest chance of success. And lastly, to leave you with a thought that program development isn't straightforward and change isn't linear, and therefore it's really critical that we think about program development as an iterative learning process where we continually document and work with researchers and practitioners in tandem. So if you did miss the first seminar, I think it's online and you're able to access it, but it was really exciting to be part of it. Thank you, John. Back to you.
Many thanks, Shanaz, for that summary. That within the span of 3 minutes, you couldn't do more than that. So Excellent summary. So now I know Stella did a very good summary during the second seminars, and I want to give her the opportunity to speak a few about what transpired during the second webinar. Stella, as you take the floor, you can briefly introduce yourself for the audience to really understand who is Stella. So please take the floor.
Thank you. I'm John again to add my voice to Shanaz. You're giving us a task that we did in 30 minutes, we're doing in 3 minutes. We're going to try our best. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am Stella Ayo Odongo. I am the Director of Pathfinding at the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. I was privileged to be part of a very exciting and engaging second seminar that took us delving deep into 3 interventions that have been successful and proven across the continent, but also within specific countries. One of the interventions was shared by Raising Voices, and Shanaz has already alluded to this. Raising Voices shared on their work that they're bringing to scale on the Good School Toolkit. And the Good School Toolkit currently, for those who know about it, is already reaching out to more than 1,000 schools in Uganda. But I want to add that beyond Uganda, I think the Good School Toolkit is one of the interventions that is being promoted within the Inspire strategies. And a lot of countries have adapted the Good School Toolkit to inform their programming in country. What it also did during that seminar, during the second seminar, we got to understand how the Good School Toolkit takes evidence-based work in the whole school, and above all, uses that to transform the operational culture in the school and changing the mindset, involving teachers, involving the children, making the learner take the lead and the teachers also being part of this conversation. That was very, very exciting, and a lot of learning emerged from there. The second intervention that we listened to and we benefited from during the second seminar was the intervention that is titled No Means No. And they shared deeply about their work on transforming knowledge and attitudes and life skills through Empower in Kenya, Malawi, and Uganda, but also specifically looking at how these programs interventions can challenge gender norms and promoting equitable relationships in Kenya using Your Moment of Truth. And they shared a lot of good things that are working, how they involve different stakeholders, and how they bring this to play. The last intervention that was very, very interesting was also the one that was shared by the Population Council. And this was basically their work in providing psychosocial support for children and parents through asking and telling in quote unquote in Kenya, and also creating safe environments through zero tolerance to violence against children model in South Africa. Now, these are the 3 interventions that were shared, but I just want to delve a little bit into the thread that cut across the 3, and Shanaz has already alluded to this. Like in the first seminar, one thing that came through is that schools and it showed that schools serve as a very, very effective entry point for interventions to prevent violence against children. Whether it involves improving relationship, the school is still a good entry point. Whether it involves gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health, the school is still an entry point. And whether it is involving the transformation of school culture, the school is still a very, very important entry point. The second thread that cuts across all these 3 was the importance of integrated approaches, multi-stakeholder, multi-component interventions that are key in engaging, especially engaging multiple stakeholders. And when we look at the school administrators, the students, the pupils or students themselves, and again, beyond that, also bringing all these programs to scale. I know the Good School Toolkit started off focusing on primary schools, but now we see it being scaled out to secondary schools and bringing on board community leaders, teachers, and children. The third one that cuts across is the issue of scale up. And I want to talk about scale up and link it directly to adaptation. So looking at adaptation of these interventions and scaling them up. And one of the key components that emerged was that creating linkages between the practitioners, the implementers, and the programmers is very, very key if we're going to look at scaling up. But also to note that because we are using the school as an entry point, the challenge of packed timetables, the challenge of inspiring teachers to pick up on these interventions is not easy, because they also have to focus on promoting the learning, the primary role for which students are in school. And yet this is also an important aspect of creating a safe environment for learning. Now, what emerged is also that the promoters and the programmers and all the supporters as stakeholders do acknowledge that if we are to realize the progress in learning, it's important to look at the entire environment. So that is critical, that while we look at those other negatives, that there's the recognition that it is important to address some of these underlying causes that may impact on the educational outcomes. Now, I want to share just three others and then I close. One is the importance of having targeted interventions for different forms of violence. We saw this with the population, program. We saw this with the Good School Toolkit, that targeted interventions for different forms of violence is critical. Another is something that is dear to my heart and is what the Global Partnership is about, that building partnerships between stakeholders, multiple stakeholders across sectors is critical and very, very a key component in ensuring sustainability and scale up of any program. You can be the best in anything, but for as long as you don't build these relationships and you don't build partnerships and you don't share, it may not come to naught. And then importantly, something that is critical is adapting context-specific innovations and creativity. And I picked this from, I think it was the intervention that was shared by the Population Council. One intervention that they shared, one innovation and creativity that they shared was the issue of bringing roasting and bringing food as a creative way of bringing the men on board. And this is with due respect to the men. Deepak and John, I don't mean an offense to you and all the other men. It's not that the food is what brings you on board. But it was very, 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 very impactful, because then when the men realized that there was something nyama choma to speak about it, they all gathered and came around. And I think it's important that when you're looking at adaptation and scale up, we need to look at those interventions that work. And finally, investment is needed for adaptation and scale up. And when we talk about investment, we're looking at the technical, we're looking at the resources, and above all, the financial. A lot of these promising practices are good, they are working, but we need to now bring them to scale, and bringing them to scale requires investment in terms of empowering the practitioners and the frontline workers with the resources, and then with investing financially in that. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Stella, for that good summary, which you have been able to do in a very short time that I allocated to you. So now is the time for us now to focus on what has brought us together today. And I would like now to introduce the main facilitator for this seminar, who is Deepak Neka. Deepak is a co-founder and a co-director of Raising Voice Uganda, which is a not-for-profit organization. The organization works primarily in prevention of violence against children and women. And he's also the co-founder of Coalition for Good Schools. I think Deepak did a lot of work in terms of bringing all of us together to form this coalition. But you have heard what Stella said. At Raising Voice, Deepak has steered the creation, the evaluation, the scale up of the Good School Toolkit to over 1,000 schools, both in Uganda and other countries, including Tanzania. Hakielimu actually is one of the organizations which has learned a lot from Raising Voice in terms of how to use good school toolkit in prevention of violence against children, in particular in school. So that is in brief, Deepak. Deepak, I want to give you the floor now to run the show. Karibu.
Thank you, John. Thank you for those kind words. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. And it's really great to hear all the thinking that has already been done. Yeah, that we heard from both Shanaz and Stella, that we have taken a journey together over a series of webinars to arrive at a question. That where do we go from here? How do we capitalize on the momentum that is clearly there, right? From those of you who have been working on the issue of preventing violence against children for a while now, know that something is in the air. From the very early days when the Secretary General's study was being planned and then was published, to several synthesis publications that came out from UNICEF and places like that, to VAX surveys that had started adding some flesh to the bone in terms of the contours of this problem, to initiatives like No Violence in Childhood that synthesized all this knowledge, to then kind of coming to on the scene, Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, and then our very own Safe to Learn Global Initiative. All of that is slowly building the momentum towards addressing the issue of violence against children. So we are at a particular moment in the work that we are doing as a collective of practitioners working on the front line. So today, we want to ask the question that, how do we capitalize on this momentum? How do we make sure that we don't miss the train that is currently gathering pace? And as a coalition, as a bunch of colleagues that have come together, we kind of begin to crystallize some key issues that we need to address. And then today we have panelists that are going to help us reflect on this. So we know that we have to make a clear case for why we should prioritize the issue of violence against children in schools. Even colleagues who work on the issue of violence against children tend to often think of addressing the issue in the homes or in the community. So why schools? The second question that we also want to reflect on today is how to enlist support of key decision makers. Yeah? People who are in the government, people who are influential in a community of practice, where we share our work with each other and we influence each other and learn from each other. And finally, how do we advocate for resources and adequate resources to be invested in this issue? And how do we make them accessible to people who are working in the global south and who are working on the front lines? So those are the kind of 4 issues that we'll explore in the next 40 minutes or so. And we have an eminent panel with us today to help us reflect on those. So maybe let me start by kind of taking them in the order that they're in. So maybe we'll go first to Bernadette. Bernadette Madrid. Dr. Bernadette Madrid is from Philippines, and she's Director of Child Protection Unit at University of Philippines, Manila. She is Associate Clinical Professor of Pediatrics. She is Executive Director of Child Protection Network. She is connected to a wide range of networks that are influential in different spheres in which they operate. So, you see her in all sorts of meetings organized by WHO. You see her influential in UN circles with UNICEF and other places. You see her work influencing the government and policy-making decisions in Philippines. So we are really lucky to have Bernadette with us. We also have Sabah Lashan, who is coordinator of African Partnership to End Violence Against Children. She's based at African Child Policy Forum. She has decades of experience of designing and implementing work that addresses children's rights and gender. And so she brings with her all the collective experience that African Child Policy Forum has accumulated over the years. And so I think that will be a really important voice as well. We also have Dr. Lina Maria, who is based in Colombia, and she's coordinator of the Latin American Hub for the coalition. but she's also the director of operations at Olaze Past. She's also a lecturer at University of the Andes, and she's published widely on some of the things that we'll be talking about in terms of influence, in terms of psychology, in terms of how violence is perceived and so on. So Lina brings a particular experience from Latin America, and particularly of bringing networks together and how to kind of enlist other colleagues. Ifar, who is the director of Safe to Learn Initiative, the global initiative. Chloe has been a veteran. She's worked on the issue of violence against children in schools. As a director of Safe to Learn Initiative, she's really done some championing of the issue in very influential circles. She's developed a strategic plan that really speaks to what is coming from the grassroots, and she's been an ally and a partner for Voices in Global South. Chloe, before the Safe to Learn Global Initiative, was also based at World Bank, where she was kind of developing and led the work on Safe School Initiative. She has a lot of experience from Latin America, but she's also worked in many other countries in the world. So she is also an experienced protagonist for this issue. So collectively, we hope that all four of these can help us reflect on some of these questions that we have. We have a really eminent panel, and we are really privileged to have them together with us. So perhaps let me start by, to get the ball rolling, by asking Bernie. Bernie, you have moved in all these influential circles, and you've heard the arguments around preventing violence against children. So why do we need to can you talk a little bit about your experience, the need to make this an articulated
dropped.
Hello?
Yeah, I think Deepak's computer connection might have dropped. Am I correct, John?
Yeah, I'm not seeing, well, I could see him, but probably there's a problem of connection. So let's have a second and see how we proceed. He has disappeared. He has disappeared.
I think I can answer his
Yes.
question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So while I think I got Deepak's question.
Exactly.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants in this webinar. I'm so very happy and honored to be part of this. And really hearing the summaries of the first two webinars really excites me, because the question now is, we have all of these programs. We already have ideas, great ideas on what works. So how, and as Stella said, the challenge is, how do we now adapt them to our different countries and then scale them up? And that means, investment of resources, financial, manpower. And we all know that in developing countries, the resources is really not that much. And so there are many priorities that's really battling for the same resources. So how do we convince government, the Department of Education, in my case, for example, to adopt programs that will end violence in school and through schools, knowing also that the schools themselves, in terms of achieving their objectives, of course, they always want all the students to get high marks in all the standardized examinations, all those cognitive objectives are very important, and the teachers feel so overworked, and that they don't have time, to do much more, because they even need more time to to do what they're already doing, which they think is their primary function, which is to teach. So how do we get inside there, you know, and for the schools to consider that ending violence against children is just as important, you know, as learning the 4 R's, as reading, writing, and arithmetic, and achieving all of those cognitive objectives, you know. And so the challenge is our framing. How do we frame ending violence? That it is important, that schools, you know, should be involved there with just as much investment as they would in the what they call the regular education of the children. So for me, we have actually the evidence on how to frame this. And the evidence shows that if children are victims of violence, they do not perform well in school at all. They do not achieve the objectives, the cognitive objectives that the school wants them to accomplish. They just can't if there's no intervention to prevent violence and to intervene when there's violence. So we have to make the school realize that achieving our objectives is actually also achieving their objectives. That those two objectives are not different, they're not separate, that they're one objective. And that investing here in ending violence will mean the school will achieve its objectives and what it's called its regular objectives in educating children. For us, you know, that when we were selling, marketing, however you advocating, whatever the words you're going to use it for safe schools in the Philippines, sure, we talked about violence against children, but at the same time, we also said, but we are also wanting these children to be able to really perform well in school. Why are they not performing well in school? Why are they failing? Why are their grades low? Okay, so why are they not learning? Okay, so once we convince the leadership in the schools that really, you know, violence against children is that one big block that they need to face and do something about for them to achieve their objectives, you've won them over. You know, you've won them over, and they're with you, you know, all the way. And they're not going to look at ending violence as something separate from education. So
no,
that's my main message.
Yeah, no, you make a really important point, Bernie, that until we make a common cause with people who are thinking about how education is delivered, and then how it is experienced by children in school, it's very difficult to find traction on this. And then we have to work through the entire ecosystem, right? Not just teachers at school, but all the people who influence how education is delivered. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Let me turn to Sabah now. Sabah, you have worked for years, and African Child Policy Forum has worked for years in convincing decision makers and policymakers to take issues seriously. And so maybe we can start by asking you in terms of how can we engage policymakers and decision makers around the issue of violence against children in schools, and what has been your experience so far when you're trying to do that, given that you have years of experience of doing that? Sabah?
Yes, thank you, Deepak. Thank you very much first of all, for inviting us here to this important event. Glad to be here with you all. So just before I begin, a bit about ACPF. ACPF is the Pan-African Institute for Policy Research and Advocacy for the African Child. The organization was established with a conviction that putting children first on public agenda is a fundamental to the realization of the rights and well-being of children, and to bringing about a lasting social economic progress in Africa. So since its establishment in 2003, ACPF has played a key role in child rights sphere in Africa by contributing to knowledge building. And yes, so what a major part of our work has been promoting state accountability and also trying to put some neglected area of concerns in the area of child rights into the public agenda, for example, like violence against children. So going back to the question, I think building on the rights argument, it's very critical that leaders are involved, especially leaders in government, are the principal stakeholders whose obligation is to ensure children's rights to education and safe and dignified life. So ACPF is actually based on the theory of change, which postulates that however important the work of civil society organization, or for that matter, any actor, that sustained change can come only through improved and vigorous state action by way of articulation and implementation of appropriate and effective policies and programs. So the involvement of leaders as champions will also trigger principal personal dedication that has potential to inspire many others. So such dedication can also create an enabling political, of course, political environment for civic action. So as you know, for advocacy to be credible and effective, it really must be based on knowledge or good research, backed by really wide movement for children. So in our work, we combine research and policy dialogue and advocacy, capacity building to primarily advance state accountability to children's rights. So I would say it is really paramount that primarily governments, and in this case, the education sector, leaders in the education sector, really champion the issue of violence against children, prevention of violence against children in schools. Deepak, back to you.
Let me ask you a follow-up question, though, Sabah, that, some people might say to you that even though if we do it in the manner that you say, that we are well prepared, we have good research, we have good data to kind of make a case, many politicians will sign on to the agenda, but will not deliver on anything. Yeah, haven't we had that experience? So why bother doing that? What would you say to people who are listening right now, who might be in the back of their head wondering about that?
Yeah.
Sabah, before you respond, can you put your video on?
Yes, it's just that I'm struggling with unstable
connection. The bandwidth might be an issue.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Just proceed.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, Deepak, that's a really good question. I would say for us, particularly for this topic, preventing violence against children in the school setting, it is really an agenda area that could be sellable to everyone. And first of all, we cannot emphasize enough that school, as has been mentioned earlier, from the outcome of the two webinars, that it is the space where children spend a large proportion of their time and it really needs to matter to everyone, especially to leaders in the education sector, in order to provide safe and protective environment where children can freely learn, socialize, form relationships, which is basically outside, the first setting outside of their family. And second, I think what evidence tells us, which already mentioned by many of the panelists before, is that a great number of children in school suffer from different forms of violence. So we also know that millions of children in school face multiple and intersecting forms of violence because of their different factors, gender, disability, or just simply because they are different. So school safety is an important factor in the overall educational achievement of learners, when schools are not safe, like already mentioned by the professor, there is increased absenteeism and a poor educational outcome. It's also the case that education has the potential to reduce incidents of violence by inculcating a culture of practice and respect for human dignity among generations. We know that incidents of violence diminish with increased level of education. So there are many factors that can really support our argument, that can really help us in making the case. Last but not least, we also know that access to quality and equitable education is a safe and a violence-free environment, school environment, is a fundamental right for children. So what all these tells us, or what all these factors confirm, is that education sector is one of the most critical sector, like Stella mentioned, that can potentially disrupt and break the cycle of violence and ultimately contribute to ending violence against children in all its forms and in all settings. So it has a huge potential to really make a difference in our efforts to preventing violence against children. Back at you, Deepak.
Thank you. No, I think you make a compelling case, right, that the stakes are so high. I wanted to offer Stella an opportunity. Stella, you have worked around these pathfinding countries and then kind of talking with governments and ministries around how crucial this issue is and galvanizing kind of political will around it. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how it speaks to the importance of getting key influential policymakers on board as well?
Thank you, Deepak. I think just building on to what Saba has said, mobilizing political will and political commitment is one of the key agendas that the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children has been following on. And when the partnership was established, they created what they called the pathfinding countries, which are countries that are championing the efforts to end violence against children. And those countries make global and public commitments to champion the agenda to end violence against children. To date, we have over 37 countries that have made this commitment to end violence against children. In Africa alone, we have 12 countries that include, and I'm glad that a lot of the countries that are on this call are part of the pathfinding. Philippines is part of it, Colombia is part of it, Uganda is part of it, Tanzania is, and all together, all these countries have demonstrated that political commitment and leadership is critical, because where there's political leadership, we have seen these countries sign up, for example, to the call to action on education that the Global Partnership has generated. With the political commitment, we've seen them sign up to We Protect, which is ensuring the protection of children to online violence. So it is a key ingredient, and therefore, as a global partnership, we'll use that as the catalyst to drive change and to mobilize action around this general agenda, because like we said, it requires multiple actors, civil societies, private sector, but once we have the leadership coming from the politicians, we then have the right people in the seat. And it is also a recipe to driving investment and resources. Once we have the leadership committed, we see investment coming in. We've seen that happening in Sierra Leone, where we have seen the president himself actually chairing meetings where stakeholders are discussing violence against children, because Sierra Leone is gearing up to become a pathfinding country. We've seen Colombia, we've seen the directorate coming up to implement a national plan of action. So all these are actual efforts that we see happening that is as a result of the commitments that leaders have made. Over from me.
Don't forget our own Uganda too. Chloe, if you wanted to add some reflection on this issue of persuading policymakers and decision makers and the importance of bringing them on board if we are likely to succeed in a sustainable way. Chloe?
Oh, Deepak, sorry, I didn't hear you were talking to me specifically. No, I mean, Saba and Stella, already put a very strong case on how to do it. In Safe to Learn, very specifically, what we do is really targeting the decision makers in education so that we can embed violence prevention within the education sector. But we not only do that, we also target the ministers of finance, because we know that there is also a negotiation between finance and between education to negotiate the budget so that the Minister of Education can get the allocation to then do it in-house throughout the education system. So it's really a way of helping them do it and framing it in such a way that it's really crystal clear that by preventing violence in and through schools, they're reaching their own objective of making all children learn, which is the main objective of all ministers of education worldwide. It's really focusing on the learning crisis, making the case, using different tools that have been exposed today during this seminar, but also, framing, using different voices to do that. For example, when we developed the investment case with the World Bank, it was so powerful because it was the World Bank. And we know that policymakers actually read what the World Bank is doing. And it's really looking for ways that will convey the message more impactfully to the people that we want to convince. So, and we're still in the fight of doing that.
Thank you. And then both you and Stella have knocked on so many doors in terms of engaging people in conversations about this issue, right? And so in some ways, when you talk about it, it seems like doable, but there's a lot of hard work and resilience that goes into doing that kind of work. So we should celebrate that too. Yeah, thank you for that. So maybe if I turn now to Lina, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to make one point.
Okay, yes,
the how part. I'm so sorry for interrupting you. But just one point, the how part is not the easiest thing to do, like Stella and Chloe mentioned. But we feel it really requires a shift in approach, not only from the government side, but I think from all sides, including us in civil society community, but also the academic world. Just one point, the point about the contribution of preventing violence against children in and through schools and all other learning environments for not only improving the learning outcomes of children, but also for ending all forms of violence against children in all settings. Is an issue that is, we think, is yet to gain traction within the education sector. And this is, I think, very critical. Actors involved in this field need to double their efforts to build knowledge around it and support government to plan, design, implement, and monitor their policy and other measures within this lens. So both the education and the child protection sectors need to play really their fair share of adapting the right tools. These could range from well-resourced policy measures, which in itself, of course, proved not to be sufficient deterrent to violence against children, but it is an important tool. Second is the tool addressing the patriarchal attitudes and perceptions of the entire school community, which I really liked one of your major contribution of the first webinar. It really spoke about that in detail. So addressing that, the perception of the entire school, staff, people, the parents, community members, the issue about improving teaching and learning methods creating a safe learning space. I loved where Professor Shanaz, in the first webinar, she mentioned how it's very critical that we not only invest in schools, but also try to get it outside. So I think these points are very important. Second, I think my last point will be, I would like to mention the multi-sectoral nature of the work of preventive violence in schools, which mentioned really repeatedly. But this is an approach often talked about with very limited successful examples. So making sure that the education sector works with the broader child protection and development sectors, and even the humanitarian sector, is really a daunting task. So one that can be supported through documenting good practices, particularly in measuring impact, I would say. So that's I wanted to make that point very, we feel that's an important point. So here it's also important to recognize that not only government that has difficulty in planning, implementing, monitoring multi-sectoral action, but non-state actors like us, civil society organizations, also need to be really willing to do a bit of soul searching to effectively support that effort. So yeah, thank you, Deepak. Back to you.
Thank you, Sabah. And you make a really crucial point, right? That all of us, particularly people in the business of delivering education, but also other people around us, need to own this problem for it to gain traction, right? Chloe, you wanted to add to that point?
Yes, very quickly, Deepak, thank you. I just wanted to jump and add one point to what Sabah's really very eloquently mentioned now. I think one thing that is very important is to demystify what it means to prevent violence in and through schools and what it can cost. And it's like, we know that the cost of violence against children can be enormous. And in school, it's been evaluated, we evaluated with the bank to $11 trillion globally, which is huge. But what we need to emphasize is to scale up interventions like the Good School Toolkit, for example, that you know very well, Deepak, and other evidence-based interventions is very cost effective. And it doesn't really require a lot of investment. It just needs to follow a protocol of intervention that is backed up by evidence, and then bringing to more children. But I think demystifying what it requires to really embed violence prevention and education is what we need to repeat again and again.
Yeah, no, and that's, by the way, we are going to it in the next discussion with Lina. But I think if you are listening to this, if you haven't seen the economic case that Chloe and Quentin and others have published, it's a really powerful document that lays out what the cost of this problem is. And it lays out a vision that it may be expensive, but it's not formidably expensive to actually make a dent in this issue, right? And the cost of not doing anything is much higher than the cost of doing something, right? So let's go to Lina. Lina, you and Olaz and Paz have had long experience of working around kind of building consensus and working with people around bringing them around the same table. In the Latin America hub, you've been particularly successful in bringing other practitioners around the table and in building a community of practice. Can you reflect a little bit on why that is important and what are you seeing as you are in process of doing that?
Thank you, Deepak. Well, I think that the answer to that question is actually very related to what Chloe, Sav, and Stella were saying before. And it's the idea that in order to have either successful interventions, promotion of laws that actually work on preventing violence, you need to have everyone on the same page, which is not easy, even at the national level, because maybe you have a law in Colombia, for instance, we have a law, it's called the law of convivencia, which is a word that in Spanish means peacefully living with others. And that bringing that law together or making pass it through Congress was really difficult, and it was a challenge because you needed to bring academia, you needed to bring politicians, you needed to bring NGOs, you needed to be multilateral organizations in order to have something that was adequate to respond to the problem. Now that we are working on the Latin American hub, it has become clear to us that each country in our context have they have their own challenges. So Mexico has been working on different projects, but also because they're federal states, they have different law. And same thing happens to Brazil. Chile is trying to build a national law. So it's challenging. And we have learned, I think, at least 3 things about bringing people together and organizing a community. First, to understand that we have different voices and that it's okay to have different voices. We don't want, as Colombians, that Chileans have the same kind of points in their law. However, we need to have a common understanding. That's one of the things. So bringing all voices is really, really important, and learning from the diversity, but with having a common language. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I guess in the whole world, but particularly in Latin America, has been very important to have academia on board, because there are a lot of interventions in the Latin American context, and I'm really sure that in other parts of the world also that happens. But some of them, we don't have a really clear idea of if they work or not, or if they even have iatrogenic effects or negative effects. So it's really, really, really important for us to be able to have academia on board and saying all the time, you know what, this works, let's keep working on that, let's stop this. And the hub has a lot of academic people, and that voice is really particularly interesting. And then the third one is that to have really practical and useful conversations with government and with people who take political decisions regarding an issue, you need to bring not only the academia, but also the practical side. How is it that we're going to do it? Yes, it's really important, and evidence is showing this, I don't know, these findings. But how is it that in a country like ours, or any other country in the Latin American context, how is it that we're gonna implement it? Because sometimes what happens here is that it sounds really interesting, and then you go to schools in the different parts of Colombia or other countries, and then you see, no, this cannot be implemented like this. So you need to have your feet on the ground and people on the ground saying, okay, we can do this and we cannot do this. And those 3 things, I think, have been really, really successful in helping us become a community of practice.
Thank you. No, I think you say it so eloquently. You kind of synthesize so many kind of diverse ideas into those 3 points, right? And what it does is, when you have thoughtful people coming together, is that, one, it inspires us. So we all inspire each other, and we hold each other accountable. So everybody improves, everybody grows, right? Because if you're accountable, then you think more deeply, you think more rigorously a little bit, and then you think about different perspectives and diversity. Yeah. So it's clearly important, and it's something that, we need to invest and build in. Yeah. Right now, one of the things that Shanaz will tell you in terms of the study that we were doing is that people are feeling that they're working in little silos in different places, right? That you might be in India, or you might be in Colombia, or you might be in Mexico, or in Uganda, and you're working away at your little thing, and you don't know what others are doing around something similar. Yeah, and so part of our objective is to build a community of practice so that you can share and influence and inspire and learn from each other. And you express that really eloquently. Maybe, Chloe, if we move to you in the final piece of the reflection, is that many practitioners who are working in the Global South are feeling that, they're plugging away at the front lines, they're doing their work, but in a very real sense, they have very little control over where they might invest their energy, because key policy decisions are made elsewhere. Yeah, and you, with Safe to Learn initiative, have been really vocal about bringing diversity of voices, just like Lina was talking about. And so, can you talk a little bit about the experience of making that case, investment case, to a wide range of people, and arguing that we should have diversity of voices, we should have voices from Global South, influencing what policy decisions we make, what directions we take. Can you reflect a little bit on that? given that you're one of the champions?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really, with Safe to Learn, just for those who don't know, it is a coalition of 14 partners from education and violence prevention sectors, but it's a diverse coalition. And it's been evolving over the years, but what we're trying to do is really to shape it as a platform to elevate the diversity of voices and to support those who are doing the work at the local, at the national, at the international level, like everywhere. It's really to empower everybody with the vision that we all want the same thing. But to achieve what we all want, meaning that there is no more violence in and around schools, we absolutely need this ecosystem that you mentioned at the beginning, Deepak. It's like Stella mentioned it as well, and Bernie too. It's like no one type of stakeholders can solve the issue. And we're still building up the evidence base, above all in low and middle income countries. We have strong evidence base in high income countries, but we're still building it in low and middle income countries. But we have so much richness in terms of savoir-faire, in terms of knowledge, in terms of people who have dedicated their life to working, as you mentioned, in the forefront in preventing violence in and through schools. So we absolutely need to build and capitalize on this knowledge and elevate it as much as we can, so that what we're doing is actually well informed and, as Lina was saying, can be implemented in school and in the community, because it's really, if it just stays in paper and the policy, design, it's all beautiful. But what we want, bottom line, is results for the children and their community. So it's being very systematic about the narrative, being very systematic about the importance of building this diversified ecosystem to create the change that we want. And we use the voices of the different partners within Safe to Learn and their sister organizations to push and to really convey this message again and again, to anyone we're talking to.
Thank you. No, I think that you make a really crucial point, right? That people working on the front lines have specific experience that they have to contribute to our decision-making process, right? That we can't afford to lose. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are different contributions that we need around the table to come up with a holistic solution. Yeah. And one voice that we need to elevate a little bit more is people who are working on the front lines. Yeah. And we need to come up with practical mechanisms so that people don't feel that it's just lip service that we are paying, that we all say these things, but so how will reality change? Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit to that point?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think, we've been dealing with this terrible, like it's, we're 2022 and we're still facing with 1 billion children experiencing violence in different settings. Like, come on, 2022, we're still there. Like, we can go to the moon, we can do anything, but we cannot solve these issues. So we need to do things differently. And we have undermined in policy making, the voices of the practitioners, the voices of the people who have the knowledge, those savoir-faire. So we need to change the game. We need to, instead of having them last, we need to put them first. We need to elevate, because again, what is not working in the implementation? It's not having the beautiful words, it's actually making it work on the grounds, in the school, in the community. And so to make it happen, we need to go and work meaningful, as you said, like in a very meaningful and trustful collaboration with the people who have been doing that for decades and who know the reality of the schools and the community. And we need to bring that to the forefront, really.
Thank you. Bernie, you wanted to add to that point?
Yes.
Go on.
I think the reality of the world is that people in power, people with the purse strings, wants to talk to people that they know, that they are familiar with, or people that they trust, and when you're talking about people in the front lines, working in the front lines, they're not that, unfortunately. I mean, that's the reality of the world. Okay.
Right.
So that's why you need an organization or people who have power to lift those people who do not have power. So maybe that's who are these people who are known, you know, like you, Deepak, you are known. You, Chloe, you're now known.
No, but really,
So really, it's in your power to lift these people who are unknown to be known.
Right.
Yeah.
and it's what we're trying to do. For example, you know, through the Safe to Learn coalition, within the coalition, we have the World Bank, we have the GP, we have ECW, we have the government of UK, we have the government of Canada. We have very powerful people out there. And we're using this platform to actually try to do things differently. And we've been working with a coalition of good schools since the very beginning, because we're very much like-minded and trying to shift things around, doing things differently. Otherwise, we will, you know, if we keep on doing the same thing, we end up with the same results. But we're taking our responsibility through our, you know, our platform, our Safe to Learn coalition, to really try to bridge the gap between the decision makers and the practitioners in everything that we.
Yeah, and I want to add to that by saying that, you know, these decision makers, these policy makers, people who are sitting in New York and DC and Geneva and other places, they are our friends. They're not bad people. There are blind spots, right? They want to work with us. They clearly believe in our vision. Yeah. So our role is to stretch the comfort zone a little bit. Yeah, and say to people that, hey, let's do practical things that makes decision-making power nearer to the front line. Let's think of ideas that practically puts in action some of the words that we are using, right? That we want to share power, we want diversity of views, we want to experience many different experiences, influence how we forge forward, because we have an opportunity right now. We appear to be in a significant moment right now, right? That people are tired of old ways of doing things. Yeah, and people are in a place where that they are open to fresh thinking a little bit. Yeah, that sharing power a little bit, challenging power dynamics a little bit, and so there is possibility of us having traction in that. Lena, did you want to add to that point? And then we'll come to you, Chloe. Yeah.
Something very short, and that is something that else that we have learned from listening to the voices here in Latin America, and what have really worked for us to be able to make that connection and help the people in power make decisions that actually become reality is to start on the house. How is it that you do it? Because for all of us, we can share this idea that it's very important to keep schools safe and things like that. But if we don't help translate that knowledge into specific ideas on how to do it, it is really difficult for them to make the correct decisions that help us, the people who are implementing the programs, actually do something that works. So the house are really, really a key point on how to have those conversations. Yes, we need that, but this is how evidence shows, and this is in our context, how we think we can do it and it would work. And that for us has been really, really successful.
And that how depends on people discovering their voice and using it. Yeah, exactly. People like us.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So maybe we'll go to Stella and then to Chloe. Stella?
Thank you. To the how, I want to add the what, and that is the reality. I think we need to impress upon those of us who are in these spaces, need to impress upon the decision makers that as much as they are up there, at times they need to acknowledge that they are ignorant. And I'm using the word ignorant in quote unquote. And therefore we need to be able to tell them that, look, those who know are those at the front line. And we who are there need to create the pathway for the space for these people to engage. Because if they trust Deepak, if they trust Chloe, if they trust me, and I invite them to say, come and give opening remarks at this virtual event. And before your remarks, then I'll give a voice from a practitioner that will speak to the reality, speak to the challenges, speak to the opportunities and how they can make the change. Then that is how we're going to get things happening. So I think we hold the key. We who are the brokers hold the key. So we should be able to play our brokerage role right. To what extent do we have these at the front of our minds? I'm not going to say back, at the front of our minds. And then also to add that as we talk about the frontline workers, I think a crucial voice is the voice of that child in the classroom that actually experiences the violence and can talk about their lived experience to then change the situation. Deepak, you know how through the Good School Kit, we have had the lived experience of children change the way teachers do things. And for a policymaker seated in DC, I mean, this is alien to them. You know, when we were pushing this agenda in Uganda and we were meeting some of those high-level politicians, none of them listened to us until we shocked them with the statistics, until we brought the children to speak to them. So I think we need to begin bringing this to the fore and telling ourselves and also those who make decisions that while we sit in those places, we actually are ignorant. We need the frontline workers. We need the voices to be able to drive this agenda.
Thank you for stating that. Chloe, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more with both, Stella and Lena, because both of them are very complementary and go really very well together. I think, Stella mentioned the name of broker, and I think it's exactly our role. And we need to be strategic brokers in the sense that, not to undermine what Bernie was putting forward, which is a really concrete obstacle and constraint that we're facing on a daily basis. But our role at the international level, together as a community of practice, is actually to unlock the doors, but to unlock strategic doors. For example, within Safe to Learn, what we're doing is working through the main partners in education of the government. So we're trying to change the practice of the Global Partnership for Education, which is providing, millions of dollars to transform education to different countries and work within them. Once you engage in these kind of processes, it becomes crystal clear that you need people to guide, to implement, to do the work. And it's how we bring, we open the door for the voices, for the practitioners, and those who actually have the savoir-faire and the knowledge, in this tragic change making. So our role is to be accountable and to do it and keep doing it.
Yeah, our role is to be catalyst, to be a bridge, whatever metaphor. Our role is to bring credibility to diversity of voices, right? Because people trust voices that they find credible. Yeah, so how can we make diversity of voices credible? That's our work, yeah? Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I kind of just wanted to take 1 minute to bring it together. This is a culmination of a thinking that we've been doing over 3 seminars. Yeah, that we looked at all the work that is going on around preventing violence against children. What can we learn from it? We then looked at practitioners on the front line and said, okay, in your day-to-day work, when you do this, what are you learning and what can we learn from it? And then in this final webinar, we said, so how do we take advantage of all the things that we know, and how can we capitalize on this momentum that appears to be in this moment? And we had some fantastic ideas in terms of how we move forward with this and take these ideas forward. I think this is an ongoing piece of work, that this is just the beginning. And so I think that if you're interested in more discussions like this, visit us at coalitionforgoodschools.org, our website, and sign up for some of the newsletters, blog posts, and other things that will be coming your way. But know that this is the beginning of conversation, and we count on you, all the people who are participating today, to bring your voice to the table, to be part of the diversity of voices that we are talking about. Yeah, so that we collectively, we can take this issue of violence against children, particularly in schools, forward and right this moment. And with that, I hand it back to our chair, John, for final words. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists.
Many thanks, Deepak, for excellent chairing of this discussion. I want really to thank you all the speakers, Claude, Benny, Saba, Lena. You have really inspired the discussion. So thank you very much. But also, I want to thank you again, Shanaz and Stella, for the introduction that they made, which have made our participants who are joining for the first time, at least to be up to speed. So just final quick summary on what really we need to do to ensure that we maintain the momentum for this work. We really need to continue articulating clearly case for prioritizing prevention of violence against children in the school. We need to elicit of key decision makers in government and education sector to support this movement, to support the initiatives that are coming from Global South, to support the ideas that are coming from practitioners. We need to continue creating a community of practice with the opportunity to share and influence and learn from each other's work. We have had a lot, and as Deepak said, let's continue engaging. But again, more importantly, we need to really to continue really pushing for adequate investment accessible to practitioners on the front line. So I believe together, if we continue raising our voices, we can succeed to make schools a safe place for our children to be educated, to grow and thrive. So thank you very much for all those who have taken time to join this webinar and the previous one. I really welcome you to continue engaging. We'll let you know if there's anything that will be coming up, then we will reach out to you to invite you to join us. So thank you. I wish you all the best. Asante sana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.